Just when India and the US appear to be in the final stage of sealing a trade agreement, the USA has come up with a new set of tariffs. So, the US Trade Representative has proposed an additional 12.5% duty on imports from India and 23 other countries over alleged forced labor practices in the supply chains. We have with us senior business journalist Ravi Kanth to decode what it means for India. Welcome, sir. So,
Welcome.
first of all, we'll start with what are the economic implications for India with these additional tariffs?
Uh, f- I mean, there surely will be a lot of economic implications. To start with, India has already been, hammered with tariffs by the U.S. in the first year, last year, first to 25%, and then they've added 25% more. That became 50%, which completely affected most of India's, exports of a whole range of labor-intensive products like textiles, clothing, labor, and then on the top of it, even marine products. After that, this in the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled against those tariffs. Primarily, they were called IEPA, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which the American Supreme Court said is completely illegal. You needed a permission before from Congress before doing any such tariff imposition. Then, of course, once they lost the dispute, what the US did on February 26th of this year, they imposed what are called the Section 122 tariffs, which are, normally levied on considerations of balance of payment problems. But the US strictly doesn't have such balance of payment problems. And so that those Section 122 tariffs now will come to an end in the month of July, around 22nd of July or so. So this current latest tariff imposed under, using the forced labor convention is completely illegal, and it will definitely affect India's exports. And uh, we are, according to the Gazette notification, India will come under the 12.5 category. There are about 7 countries or 8 countries which are being subjected to 10%, and those include Pakistan and even Bangladesh and other Indian major competitors. So any tariff differential between what they are going to face and what India is going to face will definitely impact on your exports. So that is the larger story. But moreover, as this particular tariff is a completely illegal tariff. It's Section 301 tariffs have been sort of ruled against by the WTO panel. And in fact, in 1999, then Vajpayee government had severely condemned these tariffs. In a ruling, India had was a third party to the dispute, and India filed a sort of a long statement accusing US of reneging on its own commitments to the WTO. But today, the situation is such that we are living in a complete illegal world, particularly by a world in which the US uh, does whatever it likes to do, regardless of any rules. It has almost killed rule of law institutions, international rule of law institutions. And I mean, the same thing it is also doing within its domestic sphere, where rules are completely, set aside, and even arbitrary actions are taken against anybody who raises questions on the Trump administration's motives. So we are living in a very dangerous world. In fact, I would call this particular thing tariff as one of extort baby extort. Trump is prone to saying drill baby drill. It's so we are in the realm of in a world of extort baby extort kind of scenario which the Trump administration has imposed on countries.
Yes. So you were talking, right? So we are, living in a illegal world where the US is sort of doing whatever it pleases. So can we sort of think many are saying that the so-called labor rights violation are just
Yes.
a mask for the protectionism. So given US's own record on human rights, so
Yeah.
what moral authority does Washington have imposing such punitive tariffs on other countries?
Yeah, it's good question. In fact, there are about eight, labor conventions in which the U.S. is only party to two conventions. One is forced labor, and the other is child labor. So tomorrow, in fact, don't be surprised if U.S. takes action against India that India is not fulfilling its child labor commitments. So these conventions are completely, they're inconsistent with WTO system, the rule of law that WTO legal prudence, jurisprudence has established. That is what the 1999 case was all about. It was a case launched by European Union against the US, and several countries filed what are called third party notifications, and India was one among them. In fact, the Vajpayee government at that time took a very strong stance. I'm afraid that might not be the case now. This current government in New Delhi may not do any such thing. So your question is that yes, trade in labor, it used to be called trade in labor, was never part of the WTO agenda. In fact, in 99, at the Seattle ministerial meeting of the WTO, there were violent protests. At that time, Clinton, who was then president, wanted to bring trade in labor into the WTO rule book. But that was completely opposed by all the developing countries. So it is an act of protectionism. But what the US is doing is just not an act of protectionism. It is trying to uh, replace one action with another action, depending on the time span of such actions in its rule book. Once the IEP was, ruled against by the American Supreme Court, then the US came with Section 122. Now, the Section 122 tariffs are only valid for 150 days. So, those tariffs now will end in the month of July 22nd or so. According to those tariffs, India was subjected to 15% tariff, and now from 15 to 12.5. Now we have no clear ideas what or details about what the US is going to do in this so-called bilateral trade agreement. And imagine a scenario in which, if over and above the 12.5 that they will start imposing in the month of July, because there's still some procedural points that they have to cross before imposing the tariff. So, assuming that if, for example, India agrees for a tariff of 15%, or the US, for example, accords India with a 15% tariff, or not 15, 18. That's been the number that has been bandied about. then it could become 18 plus 12%. That's close to 30%. We don't know. But that's a scenario which cannot be ruled out because the talks are going. Will India get any accommodation for the current tariff? Question mark. Will India also have an additional tariff? That's another question mark. So these are things which the government is keeping completely under wraps, and we will only know when the agreement is finally arrived at or signed.
Yes, the US India US bilateral agreement has been quite uncertain, even quite controversial. So now with this new tariffs, what are the options does India have? Because the US ambassador himself had once said in an interview that almost 90% of the
Yeah,
talks and deals are done.
yeah.
So will this affect these negotiations, or is this a way to sort of pressure India to open up sensitive sectors like agriculture, which we have been protective for decades?
Yeah,
How do
yeah.
you see
In
that?
fact, yeah, agriculture is first and foremost. Will India resist what the US is doing? I am doubtful because under the current kind of strategic dependence that we have created for ourselves with the US, how much will it protect remains to be seen. So far, indications are not anything good or positive. Uh, as regards agriculture, no, this is an area where the US is very determined, and it will definitely impose a huge burden through the tariffs. And I think I wrote an column yesterday or day before for the Federal, in which I had argued how the American rice lobby and the American farm lobbies are carrying out a very sustained campaign against India at the WTO and elsewhere. So if this is even the U.S. Senate is completely opposed to India on agriculture, Indian government's policies on agriculture, and particularly on the public stockholding programs for food security, and also on MSP and things like that. So we have no clear idea of what is being now done in that agreement regarding agriculture. But the general fears are all, they're credible because today the Indian government is just trying to, delay the agreement on one count or other. And I'm told Prime Minister Modi is going to come for the G7 leaders meeting here in Avian later this month. So I'm not sure that this government will stand up for the interests of the particularly farmers and the workers and the small scale and medium scale exporters at this juncture.
Yes. So, standing up against the US trinary, I think, is a sort of trouble for almost many countries. So, as we saw in the news, that the tariffs, is, along with India, almost 53 other countries have also been
Yes, correct.
put on the tariff. And
Yes,
if you look at the global economy, it is already rattled by many conflicts. You have the Russia-Ukraine war still going on, the US-Iran conflict is going on, and now
yes,
Lebanon is again dragged into the conflict. So, how
correct.
will this additional levy sort of impact the overall global economy if you look at it?
The global economy is in doldrums at this point of time, and India is a big victim of that, kind of uh, difficulties that the global economy is facing. And it is expected that the current phase of tensions could lead to prolonged period of what you call stagnation and inflation. So you could already see the impact of inflation in countries like India and across several other countries. So what is it that you are seeing? When you see all this happening, basically the Americans at this point of time, they are not bothered about rules. They're not bothered about, I mean, it's kind of predatory, uh, predatory behavior of what is generally a Harvard political science academic called as a predatory hegemon. So it's not bothered about rules, but only in two areas it has come to real challenges. And I mean, it's facing real difficulties rather. Of course, one is with China, where it cannot do what it really wants to. But and the other is Iran. I mean, Iran has showed a tremendous strategic endurance and the ability to leverage whatever little assets it has, namely uh, uh, the ability to stand up to the Americans and not surrender while finding newfound, leverage points like the Strait of Hormuz, where it was not an issue before the war, but because of the U.S. war, it has now become a major chokehold on the global trade, where 25% of your petroleum and LNG go through that narrow waterway. So these two countries are really stood up. I mean, more so Iran. Iran is a weak, vulnerable country facing a range of problems, and it has been under sanctions since 1979. And today it has showed the world that, if you're determined and willing to fight for your own sovereignty and integrity, you can definitely, at least, even if you lose with an honor, dignity, which has not been the case in the recent wars that we have seen, whether in India, whether in our own borders or elsewhere.
Yes, sir. Iran's resilience is indeed, very praiseworthy and look up to. So let's just hope that India does take a strong stand against it, and we do recover from this global stagnation that we talked about. Thank you
Yeah,
so much, sir. It was a very insightful conversation. Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you, madam.